Good morning, Lantigua girls. Welcome back to the Wunderkammer, the Cabinet of Wonders. This morning I thought we'd walk a mile in someone else's shoes. They say that's the best way to get to know another person. But these are special shoes. These are shoes that mainly people who work wear. And we'll take a quick tour to Japan, then we'll go over to Europe, and we'll come back here to the United States. So we're going to start with a pair from Japan. Maybe you've seen these before. These are called Geta. Let's see if I can hold them up so you can see what they look like. Geta. Okay, so the first thing that you might notice is, knock on wood, they're carved from wood, and then they have a very heavy black lacquer on top. And you keep them on your feet with these two thongs, which meet here between your big toe and the one next to it. This way of keeping a shoe on your foot, this kind of shoe, is called zori. Zori. And this is one of the oldest kinds of shoes there are. A surface under the sole of your foot held in place by these straps between the toes. That kind of shoe is called a zori, and they've found shoes like this made of different materials, usually straw, sometimes wood if there's anything left of them, and so forth, in ancient community sites. So they're kind of extraordinary. These were probably created in Japan around the 700s and forward. Both men and women wore these kinds of shoes, although they were a little fancier for the women called geisha, the women at court. They were a little bit higher, and they looked a little bit like the French wore a kind of shoe called the chopine, where women wore beautiful, beautiful embroidered stockings or beautiful brocade shoes. And because the streets might have been filled with terrible muck, they would slip on a pair of chopines in France, or geta in Japan, and is that Nihon, I think. Anyway, and this would protect the beautiful materials that they were wearing on their feet, but they were also very practical, and in particular merchants wore these because when they were working in the marketplace, and by the way, they just wore them barefooted, slipped them on over their bare feet. This kept them up out of the scraps that were on the floors of the markets. If you've ever been to a market where they prepare food in front of you, not so much the farmer's market here, but a lot of times they just throw the scraps on the ground. And so this allowed you to walk through up and out of that, and through muck as well. And others wore them. The only thing is, you can see that they slide down into the ground, so they're not very practical for snow and mud, and yet people do wear them in all the elements because, again, it keeps the foot up off the ground. Now, usually you wear special socks. If you're going to wear socks or you're going to wear some other shoe, you have to have a sock, right, that divides here at the toe. Those kind of socks were called tabi. And so in this last century, the Japanese also created a shoe called the jika tabi. Okay, so you can see it a little better here. Divides right at the toe, just like the socks would if you were going to slip on geta. But these have rubber soles, so you can imagine that these are more modern. But these are worn by Japanese carpenters, at least those who practice the traditional Japanese carpentry. And the thinking is that because of the way wooden homes and other structures are constructed in Japan, that this allows the carpenter to feel the surface underneath his feet and to go up and down the structure in greater safety and comfort. And you can see they buckle up all the way to the middle of the calf. And I got those for Mr. Miller when I was in Japan. All right, so you see wooden shoes. They're very practical. And one of the most famous examples of the wooden shoe comes from Holland, or the Netherlands. They look like this. Now they cover the whole foot. You can see that, okay? They're called klompen, and they have a special shape, you know, with the little pointy toes like that. And these have been worn probably since the 1300s in various parts of Europe. Klompen, they're called in Holland, sabot, in France, tresco, in Scandinavia. I'll show you a pair of those in a moment. But they were very practical, because if you could work with wood, you could create one. You could create it in the size that you needed. Children wore these as well. In fact, I have a nice example. These were probably more decorative, but you see these are a little bit smaller. But this one was probably worn. Can you see that? That one was probably worn by a child. And unfortunately, I don't have the match to that. Here again, you know, wood. They don't flex much with your feet, but they were very comfortable if you wore heavy woolen socks, usually inside them. And then, because I've worn these kinds of shoes for many years, you build up kind of a callus on the top of your feet and even on the bottom of your feet, and then they become really comfortable. And they're considered very safe because it's very difficult for anything to penetrate. And in fact, in today's working world, people still wear these, people who farm or garden, and it's very difficult for anything to pass through them. And if something falls on them, then they crack off, and that way if the foot begins to swell, then the foot has room to do that. So they're very important shoes for a very long time to a lot of people. And you know, because I wore these kinds of shoes for so long, my mother, she began to give me small examples of these shoes. These are from Sweden, this little pair, and of course those are from Holland. They look like the ones I just showed you. Now, the Scandinavians also wore shoes like this called tresco, which is basically just saying tree shoes or wooden shoes. These are an old pair, and actually they're decorated with a kind of design that might be hard to see called rosmaling. And you can see, I've kind of worn these out myself. But the difference, of course, is they don't have the back like these do, right? So they slip on and off. Again, some of these would be built very high, so you could walk through the muck in these or stay up off the ground for whatever reason you needed to do that. And even today, you can see workers wearing these, but in particular, you see these in hospitals. They a lot of times will have a thick rubber sole, and they're quite comfortable. And again, because this is a hardy material, leather, and then the wood, they're considered a kind of safety shoe. And I forgot to mention that, you know, even the Jika Tabi, which I showed you, you can even get these with steel toes to protect your toes, if you desire. Now, the last shoe I'm going to show you this morning comes from, well, it has a long history, the cowboy boot. But of course, Americans didn't invent the cowboy boot. They just adapted the cowboy boot for use here in the United States. In fact, people for a very long time have worn leather shoes. You know that leather is made from the hide of an animal that's been scraped away, and if it's cured right, and if it's good leather, then it's a surface that again protects the legs. So most of the time cowboy boots come, you know, at least up to the middle of the leg, and they protect against, you know, barbed wire and rattlesnakes and things like that. Why are they rounded or sometimes very pointy? That's so the boot will go right into the western stirrup. And why the high heel? You know, in the United States, not very many men have realized the pleasures of the high heel, except for the cowboys. And so that heel comes off the ground a little bit, again, to elevate you for various reasons, but it's really mainly to keep from slipping forward in the stirrup. So again, the shoe or the boot, I should say. If the boot fits, wear it. The boot is just an adaptation of a riding boot that probably a lot of people around the world, down in South America and over in Asia and all through Europe and other places wore. It's just that ours are a little special because of the bottom of the shoe. And then, of course, they're usually decorated very, very fancily with stitching and so forth. So that's our journey today, is working shoes from around the world. And I hope to see you from across the street, or perhaps I'll see Dad in the market and wave hello. Bye-bye.